Hey everyone, my name is Jake Walbert, as all five of you know. The fraud case that I had to work on was Theranos and its CEO, Elizabeth Holmes. So let's get started. So let me first introduce you to the suspect, Elizabeth Holmes.
Ms. Holmes, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
This is Elizabeth Holmes, once the youngest female self-made billionaire. In this never-before-aired deposition, she sits across from 12 attorneys under investigation for an alleged years-long fraud.
Did it concern you that a number of tests weren't working on Theranos' devices?
Now facing up to 20 years in prison, it's a stunning fall from grace for the woman who was once poised to change the world.
This is a revolutionary company that threatens to change healthcare.
If she had made this work, she would have been the next Steve Jobs.
We've made it possible to eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood.
Her technology promised to run hundreds of tests from a tiny finger prick, a promise she would never fulfill.
This is not fake it till you make it. This product that didn't work.
Did Ms. Holmes know that Theranos could not do all those tests?
She knew. It's a story of greed, and it's a story of incredible deception.
So that's a little bit about how she was and who she was as CEO. She knew. She absolutely knew, just like that guy said, but we'll get into that in a second. So before she was a CEO of Theranos, she was a 19-year-old in 2003 who was a Stanford dropout. She then became the CEO and founder of Theranos, which is a play on words between therapy and diagnosis. And the goal of the company was to be a health and technology company that was determined to create a product that performs a multitude of blood tests with a single drop of blood. And the reason that was their goal was because, as a person, Elizabeth Holmes hated having her blood taken and having tests run. So she was passionate about pioneering this technology because of her own personal fear of needles. And I found this interesting when I was listening to a podcast. Between the ages of 8 and 10, her uncle asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up, and her response was, "I want to become a millionaire." Surprised, he said, "You don't want to be the president?" And her quick-witted response was, "When I'm a billionaire, the president's going to want to marry me." And so that's just a reflection of who she was at 8 and 10, and her dream and her personal expectations, and they came true after she became the CEO and founder of Theranos, because she quickly became the world's youngest female self-made billionaire, as stated in Forbes 2015. So who was involved? The people that were directly involved was Elizabeth Holmes herself and her then boyfriend and president and COO, Ramesh Balwani. The people who were indirectly involved were employees and board members and executives who had to have known that this was going on, that Theranos wasn't delivering on what it said it would deliver, and that it had an extreme inability to generate the revenue that it said it could. And those people simply did not speak up, or they left the company to just avoid it altogether. And I think that another set of people who were involved are the victims, the investors who lost their money on a company that really couldn't deliver on its promises, the doctors who were told that, hey, this is really going to benefit your patients, and then the patients who were so hopeful that they too, like Elizabeth, could have their blood drawn and taken and tested with just one prick and one little sample of blood. So, how did Theranos and Holmes get discovered as frauds? Once upon a lawsuit, a man by Reed Catherine, attorney at a law firm called Higgins and Berman, filed a lawsuit on behalf of investors, multiple investors. It was like a conglomerate of investors, and Walgreens, because Theranos had an agreement with Walgreens to put clinics inside their stores. They simply just wanted to recoup their losses because of the money that they invested in Holmes and her alleged corruption. After that, the story quickly caught fire and caught the eye of media, And the Wall Street Journal conducted a very thorough investigation of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. And what they came up with is reflective of the story that's being told now. Eventually, the Wall Street Journal reported that Theranos was closing its doors on its blood testing facilities and releasing 40% of its employees after regulators required Holmes to relinquish her ability to own and run any labs for 2 years. What crimes? How did they commit it? We know who done it, but how did they do it? So the ways in which they worked their fraudulent actions is really founded in the fact that Holmes is the smoothest talker in the land. She could sell ice to an Eskimo. She marketed an unprecedented confidence in investors, in herself and in her company. And so her most utilized way of conducting fraudulent acts was direct communication. Hey, I'm me, you have money, we're gonna be great, give me your money. In a similar manner, they conducted marketing and media statements that said, hey, we're gonna revolutionize the healthcare field. And they just simply couldn't deliver. And they knew that they couldn't deliver, but they were still telling people this. And of interest to us in our class, they also conducted financial statement fraud. It may not have been actually on paper. There's nothing directly saying that this occurred, but Elizabeth was telling investors that in 2014, our gross revenue is going to be $100 million, and the following year, $1 billion. Sounds a little far-fetched to me. So let's take a look into the fraud triangle. We know that the fraud triangle includes opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. As the owner, CEO, president, and COO, Holmes and Balwani had the best opportunity and the better opportunity than anyone to conduct fraud. Pressure, I believe that Elizabeth Holmes had her own internal pressures because at age 8 and 10, she wanted to be a billionaire. And her dream was coming true, but she could also see it crashing down in front of her. So she had the pressure to live up to her own dreams and expectations while also trying to prove to her investors and doctors that Theranos was everything that she talked it up to be, even though it wasn't. And I also believe that she had rationalization purposes to commit fraud because she simply did not want to see herself fail, so she was going to do everything it took to convince herself, to convince investors, and to convince her employees that Theranos is going to be great, Theranos is great, there's nothing to worry about. All a lie. So let's take a look into the charges. The U.S. Justice Department indicted Holmes on 2 counts of conspiracy for wire fraud, to commit wire fraud, and 9 counts of actual wire fraud. So the 2 counts is kind of like, hey, yeah, I'm talking to Balwani, and we're gonna mastermind a plan to convince investors to give us their money. But the 9 counts is them actually successfully doing that and taking action on it. Holmes and Theranos were not suddenly put in a spotlight all because someone had suspicions of wire fraud, because most people don't know that terminology from the back of their hand. So in less technical terms, simply there was just increased attention on the healthcare and life science company that brought about allegations that Theranos was defrauding investors, doctors, and even their patients. Theranos advertised itself as a health technology company that claimed its products were more effective and accurate than they really were. And Holmes, as the owner, was well aware of her technology's inaccuracies. So, a lot of money was invested in Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. But how much? It is estimated that just the investors alone, not even money that Elizabeth Holmes put in herself, lost between $700 and $750 million. Most of the shareholders of Theranos were these investors, and they were also star-studded board directors, some of which may sound familiar. We have the Walton family, the family who owns Walmart, who invested $150 million. We have Rupert Murdoch, who invested $125 million of his own money. We also have the Secretary of Education DeVoe's family, who invested $100 million of their own. The Cox family, Cox Television, invested $100 million as well. And then you have the New England Patriots owner, Robert Kraft, who invested $1 million of his own money. That alone is close to $500 million of that $700 to $750 million. The money that's going to get lost out of Elizabeth Holmes' pocket is $250,000 per count of wire fraud and actually committing wire fraud conspiracy. And also, she's going to lose 20 years of her life as she spends it sitting in prison. In addition to that, Holmes paid $500,000 to the Securities and Exchange Commission in fines for defrauding investors. And another set of people who I think have lost out on something is the emotional and physical pain that patients experienced as they were told that they had cancer when they really didn't, because the blood tests were simply that inaccurate, and they received treatments for those illnesses and diseases that they had. So I think they also have the biggest amount to lose. Justice. A dish best served cold. So, what did the court rule? They haven't ruled anything yet. At the moment, the only hearings and court rulings have been preliminary. So the former self-made billionaire who made it off the backs of real millionaires and billionaires is still off the hook and has not been prosecuted or sentenced. Her first trial date is going to occur on August 4th of this year, and it's going to last several days all the way through October 30th of this year. If she is found guilty on all charges to the highest degree, like I previously discussed, she will face up to 20 years in prison and $250,000 per wire fraud conspiracy and wire fraud act. She will also have to relinquish her almost 19 million shares in the company. So, surely there's something that could have prevented this from happening. This is just absolutely disastrous. My question is, are there really? Given her position and ownership in the company, this gave Holmes the most impeccable opportunity to commit fraud. And it would have been extremely difficult for anyone else who wasn't behind the books and who wasn't behind the company to see it coming. As the owner, Holmes is responsible for putting people in the places that she needs them to be. So if she wants board directors who she thinks are going to turn a blind eye when they see something awry, you can best bet she's going to put them in there. And even as an employee or a board member who had good integrity, there's nothing saying that they were bold enough to speak up about it. They probably just walked away from the company because they didn't want to be a part of it. So I really think that the only way that this could have been prevented is if Theranos was founded by somebody completely different, somebody who was much more honest, and someone who was willing to enact practices like the separation of duties, whether it be in sales pitching, marketing, or financial reporting. Also, I think if there had just been one really bold person who was not afraid of the consequences, they would have been willing to speak up and say something about the actions that were taking place. And then Theranos may actually be delivering on its promises today. Thank you guys for listening.